If you're carrying something right now that feels too heavy to hold, something you've tried to fix on your own and it just won't budge, I need you to stay with me. Because what I'm about to share might change everything you thought you knew about that weight. See, we live in a world that tells us to be strong, to figure it out, to keep it together. But what if that's the exact thing keeping you stuck? What if the heaviness you're feeling isn't a problem but a moment God is inviting you to stop carrying life alone? Here's what nobody tells you. When life feels heavy, when anxiety wraps around your chest at 3 a.m, when you're scrolling for answers but finding nothing that truly helps, something deeper is happening. God listens when you pray, but more than that, He's waiting. Not for you to have it all together. He's waiting for you to bring the mess. And by the end of this, you'll understand why surrender isn't weakness. It's the doorway to everything you've been searching for. You know that feeling when you're lying in bed and your mind is racing? The bills, the relationship that's falling apart, the career that feels stuck, the anxiety that shows up uninvited. You try to pray, but the words feel hollow. You try to push through, but you're running on fumes. This is what most of us don't talk about. We post the highlights. We say we're blessed. But behind closed doors, we're barely holding on. You're working harder, trying to control more, managing every detail, and still, nothing changes. And here's the thing that makes it even harder. You look around, and everyone else seems fine. Their faith seems stronger. Their prayers seem to work. And you start to wonder, does God even hear me? Why does life feel so heavy when I'm supposed to have peace? The exhaustion isn't just physical anymore. It's soul deep. But what if I told you that this heaviness, this exact moment where you feel like you can't carry it anymore, is exactly where God has been leading you all along? Here's the principle that changes everything. God doesn't just want to help you carry your pain. He wants you to stop carrying it altogether. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because we've been taught that faith means being strong, that trust means having it together. But that's not what Scripture shows us. In 1 Peter 5:7, we're told to cast all our anxiety on Him because He cares for us. Not some of it, all of it. Every sleepless night, every fear, every wound, every disappointment, take everything to Jesus. But here's why this is so hard. Surrender feels like giving up. It feels like weakness. We think, if I just let go, everything will fall apart. But that's the lie we've believed. The truth is, you were never meant to hold it in the first place. Think about it. When you're holding something too heavy for too long, your hands start to shake. Your muscles cramp. You can't do anything else because all your energy is going into just not dropping it. That's where most of us are living. White-knuckling our way through life, calling it faith, when really it's just fear dressed up as responsibility. God's invitation isn't to try harder, it's to finally let go. And that's terrifying because it means admitting you can't do this alone. So what actually happens when you surrender your pain to God? Stay with me, because this next part is what most people misunderstand about surrender. First, God removes what you've been clinging to. And if this sounds scary, I need you to hear this first. God never removes to leave you empty. He removes to make room. See, we hold on to things that were never meant to sustain us. Relationships we think define us. Control we think protects us. Self-sufficiency we think proves us. When you finally bring your pain to God, when you say, I can't do this anymore, I need you, something shifts. He starts removing the false foundations. The people who were draining you suddenly drift away. The job that was killing you closes its doors. The plans you were forcing start to crumble. And it feels like loss. It feels like abandonment. You think, I surrendered, and things got worse. But here's what's really happening. God is removing what you were using instead of Him. You weren't supposed to find your peace in that person. You weren't supposed to find your worth in that achievement. This isn't punishment. This is liberation. He's taking away what you thought you needed, so you can finally see what you actually need. Him. Just Him. And when everything else falls away, when the noise quiets down, that's when you hear His voice clearly for the first time in a long time. In a moment, I'll explain why this feels like loss, but isn't. Loss isn't abandonment, it's redirection. Next, God silences what's been drowning out his guidance. We live in constant noise, don't we? Opinions, advice, social media, news, everyone telling us what to do, how to feel, what to think. Here's what's really happening in our modern world. We've trained ourselves to never be alone with our thoughts. The moment there's quiet, we reach for our phones, we scroll, we binge. We fill every gap with content, anything to avoid being alone with ourselves. Silence feels threatening because it exposes what we've been avoiding. When you surrender your pain, God often responds with silence. Not because he's abandoned you, but because he's teaching you something crucial: how to recognize his voice above all the others. At first, the silence feels uncomfortable, but in that quiet space, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop trying to impress God with your prayers, and you just are. Broken, honest, real. That's when prayer stops being about the right words and becomes about connection. That's when faith and anxiety stop being opposites and start being companions on the same journey. You learn that God's guidance for struggling isn't a formula, it's a relationship. And relationships require listening, not just talking. Philippians 4, 6, and 7 tells us to not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. Notice it doesn't say the answers will come immediately, it says peace will come. Peace that doesn't make sense given your circumstances. This is the part that hurts, but also heals. Silence isn't God ignoring you. It's God inviting you deeper. And finally, here's what God constructs in the space you've emptied. And this changes how you see everything that's been falling apart. He builds something you couldn't build on your own. Real dependence. Not the kind that's forced or fake, but the kind that flows naturally because you've experienced what happens when you try to do life without him. He builds trust that doesn't need all the answers. Most of us want to trust God with the outcome if he'll just show us the blueprint first. But that's not trust, that's negotiation. Real trust says, I don't know how this will work out, but I know you're good. He builds obedience that doesn't wait for clarity. We want signs, confirmations, external validation. But maturity means moving forward even when the path isn't fully lit. And here's the beautiful part. As God constructs this new foundation, you start to notice something. The things that used to shake you don't anymore. The opinions that used to control you lose their power. The fears that used to paralyze you start to fade. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your source changed. You're no longer drawing from your own limited strength. You're connected to unlimited supply. Victory in God isn't about never struggling. It's about knowing where your strength comes from when you do. This is how prayer shapes your life, not just your mind. It rewires you from the inside out. It transforms your default from panic to peace, from control to surrender, from isolation to connection. So what does this actually look like in real time? It starts with a simple question. What am I still trying to control that I need to release? Where am I white-knuckling instead of open-handing? Because you can't surrender what you won't acknowledge you're holding. Maybe it's a relationship you're trying to force. Maybe it's a timeline you're trying to rush. Maybe it's a reputation you're trying to maintain. Maybe it's just the need to have it all figured out. What to do when life feels heavy isn't to try harder, it's to try different. Stop asking, how can I fix this? And start asking, what are you teaching me through this? Stop demanding answers and start demanding presence. God, I don't need to understand. I just need to know you're here. And here's what you'll discover. Signs God is with you aren't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just peace in the middle of chaos. Strength you didn't know you had. A friend who texts at the exact right moment. A verse that jumps off the page. Breath in your lungs. Hope when there shouldn't be any. Purpose after suffering isn't some grand revelation. It's learning that your pain wasn't wasted, that every tear you cried, God collected. that every night you couldn't sleep, He was with you. That the very thing that almost broke you is now the thing that makes you whole. Listen, if you're sitting here and you've been carrying something heavy, I want you to know something. You weren't breaking. You were being taught where to lean. The moment you surrender isn't the moment everything gets fixed. It's the moment everything gets real. Real prayer, real faith, real relationship. And that's worth more than any answer, any miracle, any quick fix. This isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter. One where you're not the hero trying to save yourself. One where you finally let God be God and you just be His. You were never meant to do this alone. And the beautiful part? You never have to again. How to trust God today isn't about having more faith. It's about taking one honest step, bringing one real prayer, releasing one tight grip, and watching what happens when you finally let go. If you've been trying to hold it together in silence, if this message found you at the right time, type, "I surrender," in the comments. Not for me, but as a moment between you and God. Let that be your declaration. Not that you're giving up, but that you're giving over. There's power in that. And if you found value here today, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because there's someone in your life right now carrying weight they don't have to carry. And maybe this is the word they've been waiting for. Until next time, remember this. Prayer that changes you isn't about perfect words. It's about honest hearts. And God listens when you pray, especially when all you can offer is the broken pieces. God bless you.